Erica and I did an 8-day, 7-night, 93-mile backpacking trip in the Grand Canyon from October 26th, 2022 to November 2nd, 2022. When we arrived at the airport, we had a good reminder on the wall and about a 6-foot sign of the Leave No Trace principles, which is good to have in the airport for everybody coming to Arizona. Anytime you backpack below the rim and stay the night, you have to get a permit. To get a permit to backpack in the Grand Canyon, you have to apply well in advance. You have to apply on the first of the month, that is 4 months prior to your proposed start date, but not more than 10 days before that, and you have to do it by fax. You'll get your response a couple weeks later. We were denied about 4 times. When you backpack in the Grand Canyon, there are 3 main corridor trails that are very well developed. They're the South Kaibab Trail, the Bright Angel Trail, and the North Kaibab Trail. There are other trails that we used as well, but those are the main ones. Anytime you're backpacking in the desert, you need to think about water, water, water. You need to know where all your water sources are because you are hiking in the desert. There's extreme heat. There's extreme other conditions like storms and flash flooding. You also need to make sure that your body's prepared. One of the things that I did was put our treadmill at a -6 degrees and would run on it with a backpack until my legs would tremble when I was just standing there. On our first day, we started down the South Kaibab Trail. Our permit was for the Bright Angel campground on one of the main corridor trails. That was about an 8.4 mile trip, a little over 4 hours of moving and 4,600 feet of descent. The South Kaibab Trail from the rim to the Bright Angel campground has essentially no water on it at all. They don't have any water sources where you can fill up. So you need to take enough to get you from the top to the bottom, and how much you need is going to depend upon what time of year you were going. We were hiking in late October, and so the conditions were very mild, even at the bottom, so we didn't need much water. This was our first day, and so we were amazed at all of the views. It was all descent, 4,600 feet down to the bottom of the canyon. We saw things and environments that we had never been in before. Along the way, we saw one scorpion, and it's the only scorpion we saw, I assume because of the time of the year. Our plane had been delayed on the tarmac in Dallas, and so we ended up hiking a big chunk of the last part of the day in the dark. But we were prepared. We had our headlamps, and we're ready for night hiking anyway. As you get down near the bottom, you reach a tunnel. And this is the tunnel that leads to the Black Bridge, which is one of 2 bridges, walking bridges, that go over the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon. So this was pretty amazing that you go through this pretty long tunnel and it just pops out on the other side on a sheer cliff face with walking bridge ready for you to walk over the Colorado River. When you get onto the bridge, it's very long. Now our first exposure to the bridge was at night, so we couldn't really see much, but we'd stop every once in a while and try to get a glimpse of the Colorado River down below. It took us about a little under 3 minutes to get across the bridge, walking pretty slow. Once we were across the bridge, it was just a very short hike to the Bright Angel campground. Day 2 ended up being 17.5 miles, 8 hours of moving time, and 2,500 feet of ascent and descent. We hiked from the Bright Angel campground to the Clear Creek use area, set up camp, and hiked the trail with our camelbacks, and then came back to camp. Clear Creek is an at-large use area, which means you can camp anywhere you want as long as you follow Leave No Trace principles. So in the morning we got up, had our breakfast, used the restroom, and immediately had to share the trail with some other trail users. Once we got started, we encountered our first mule train. This is how they get supplies down to the Grand Canyon, to places like Phantom Ranch and the other camp areas. And it's also how they get things like trash out of the Grand Canyon. Once we started up Clear Creek Trail, this is a trail that has no water sources whatsoever. So I had to carry an extra bladder of water. All in all, we had about 12 liters total between the two of us. The first part of the trail, once you get off of the corridor trails, is straight up. And as you go up, you get some pretty amazing views, including of the Black Bridge, where we could see the trail that we had hiked the night before in the dark. The at-large use area is defined by some piles of rocks. So once you pass those two piles, you know you're into the at-large use area and can set up your camp wherever you want. So as soon as we got into that area, we found the first appropriate spot and set up camp, ditched our backpacks and put our camelbacks on to hike the rest of the trail much lighter than we were before. And as you go along, you're on a plateau, but you can get glimpses of the river and the ravines down below with some pretty spectacular panoramas. We didn't quite go all the way to the Clear Creek campground, and there's supposed to be water at the Clear Creek campground, but we turned around about 3/4 or a half mile before we got there and went back to camp. The hiking was pretty easy. Only the first part of the day involved a bunch of ascent. Once you get onto the plateau, it's flat and desert-like the whole way. We went far enough that we did run out of light and saw something odd in the sky. We knew it couldn't be a helicopter or a plane, but we couldn't really figure out what it was. I was able to look up later that it's actually a spaceship. It is a SpaceX launch that was done in Arizona that you could really see that lit up the night sky. Our next day ended up being 11.2 miles, 4 hours and 20 minutes of moving, and 1,800 feet of ascent once we got onto the main part of the trail. And we were just going from our Clear Creek camp area up to Cottonwood camp area. That's on the North Kaibab Trail, which again is one of the corridor trails and is very well developed. Most of the time we were backpacking very close together, but every once in a while we'd get separated, and so I took that chance to get a video of Erica pretty far away. Once you get off of the Clear Creek Trail, you take a right and start going up the North Kaibab Trail, following along the creek. You get into an area that is called the Box, which is just sheer cliff faces on both sides of you. There are lots of bridges along the way where you cross from one side of the stream to the other side of the stream, and then back again as you work your way up to Cottonwood Campground. There weren't any regular water sources, but you were close enough to the creek along the way that you could filter water if you ever needed to. Once we got up to Cottonwood Campground, we set up camp where we would be for 2 nights with some pretty spectacular views. For day 4, it ended up being a 15.2 mile trek, 6.5 hours moving, and 4,400 feet of ascent and descent. And our entire job that day was to get to the North Rim and back. Since we were staying at Cottonwood for 2 days, we just had to wear our camelbacks to get up there and back instead of our entire backpacks. The North Kaibab Trail has water spigots along the way, but they turn them off seasonally, so you don't always have a water source. So for us, the first water source was turned on, but the water sources beyond that, including the one at the North Rim, were turned off to prevent freezing. So just like the day before, there's multiple bridges along the way that you cross to get from one side of the stream to the other side of the stream as you get higher and higher. As you get higher, you can see a great distance. You can actually see Humphreys Peak, which is a mountain that's near Flagstaff, about 60 miles away. Once we got to the top, there was actually just a little bit of snow, and we took the obligatory selfie at the North Kaibab Trail trailhead sign. We then turned around after having eaten our lunch up at the rim and headed back down. As we went down, there is a tunnel along the way right next to a mule stopover that we had to go through. On the way down, it was much easier going than the way up, so we took a little more video. Probably the defining characteristic of this part of the trail are the sheer cliff faces that are right next to the trail. On video, it looks much worse than it actually is. The trail is wide and flat in most places. A lot of times it has a little rim that makes you feel more comfortable along the edge. But as we went down, we would see birds and lizards all along the way. And after a while of going down this type of terrain, it flattens out.
It's scary, and it has
the sheer cliff faces that you're walking along disappear. So once we got back to campground, had dinner, and got to sleep, got up for the next day. Our trip was going to be 9.5 miles long, a little over 4 hours of moving, and it was all descent back down from Cottonwood Campground to Bright Angel Campground on the Corridor Trail, again the North Kaibab Trail.
I can't do it. I can't. It hurts.
Since this was going to be an easy day, we decided to do a side trip up to Ribbon Falls. Now when you go down, the bridge over the stream is out and has actually been completely taken away, so you do have to do a water crossing. The water was pretty cold, and you did have to do some bushwhacking since there's no established trail here since the bridge is out. But once you got past that part of the trail and got up to Ribbon Falls, it was a spectacular view. Ribbon Falls is essentially 2 levels that you can get to. The bottom level where there's the main pool, and the middle level, which you can hike up to, which has the water streaming down where you can actually go behind the waterfall. Then when we got down to Bright Angel Campground, we had time to go down to the Colorado River, get some better footage of the Black Bridge, and just sit down and relax next to the river, take some pictures, and take a hyperlapse of the sunset as we prepared for the evening. For day 6, we were going from Bright Angel Campground up to the Tonto West Trail to get to Salt Creek Campground. We ended up doing 13.6 miles, about 7 hours of moving time, and 2,300 feet of ascent. To start out the day, you have to get back over the Colorado River, so we took the Silver Bridge. Again, these bridges are much longer than they look. It took us about 2 minutes of walking time to get over the bridge. Now again, that's going pretty slow and stopping to take pictures of things like the mule trains and just look at the river and watch the swirling water down below. first part of the trail is the Bright Angel Trail, which is one of the main corridor trails, and it goes alongside some moving water, so you don't have to carry a lot of water. I'd heard somewhere on the internet that there wasn't water on this part of the trail, and so I was carrying an extra 6 liters of water up to where we connected with the Tonto West Trail that I didn't need to carry. Along the way, there was a cave. Had to go in it. Clearly, from the trail, people would go in it. And then out flew a bird, which I neither heard nor saw when I went in there. All this was a hole in the wall that literally dead ended about 20 feet or less into the side of the cliff face. It just dead ends about 20 feet. The Bright Angel Trail has plenty of water sources along the way where you could filter water if you needed to, and then has a spigot once you get to Indian Gardens Campground.
Yay!
However, once you get to the Tonto West Trail and get off the corridor trail, you're definitely in a desert environment, and there was no water sources whatsoever on the Tonto Trail to our campsite. It's my understanding there are some reliable water sources to filter water after Salt Creek Campground, but we didn't see any water at all as we went along. As we got closer to Salt Creek camping area, we turned into a ravine and were surrounded by sheer cliff faces on 3 sides. Once we got to our campsite, we set up camp, had dinner, and went to bed to prepare for the next day. Day 7, we're going from Salt Creek camping area to Indian Gardens. We ended up doing 9.1 miles, 4 hours and 15 minutes of moving time, and 1,200 feet of ascent. So a relatively easy day. We did make a stop at Plateau Point along the way before we got to the Indian Gardens campground. Early in the day, we passed on the trail 4 hikers that were going in the opposite direction. So I took the opportunity to take a little bit of video of them once they got a little farther away from us. And this gives you an idea of the scale of things when you're out in the Grand Canyon. As you pan farther and farther back, you can see more and more of the cliff faces. And what you're seeing right now is not the top of the canyon, on the top of those buttes. As we went to Plateau Point, we did get to see some bighorn sheep. So there was a herd of them just sitting down there eating. Once you got out to the Plateau Point, it had some pretty spectacular views, and you could see the river. Downriver, we could see 3 boats, 3 rafts going down the rapids. So it was a good opportunity again to show some video that just again shows the scale of the Grand Canyon as you pull back. Then as we got to Indian Gardens Campground, we got to see more mule trains taking trash and supplies back up to the South Road. We set up camp at Indian Gardens Campground, which is again on the main corridor, and got a chance to take this picture, which I wanted to include just to show you how good of a condition the trails are in and the facilities along the trail. So our last day was Indian Garden Campground out up the Bright Angel Trail, which ended up being about 6 miles, a little under 3 hours of moving time, and 3,200 feet of ascent. That mileage includes our walk to get back to the rental car where we left it for the week. So the defining characteristic of this part of the trail is just you're going up. There are rest stops along the way. They have 2 rest stops with toilets and water along the way. So if you're going up the Bright Angel Trail, you don't need to worry too much about water. Although, of course, especially if it's in the summer, you need to carry sufficient water. Along the way, they have some tunnels carved into the rock to get you up to the top. And it's just amazing to think about all the work that went into these trails. When you look around from the bottom especially, you can't even imagine how somebody thought they could put a trail there. But all of the trails were easily walkable, especially the corridor trails. They were wide and well maintained. And then, just like that, we were out of the canyon and back up on the south rim, and our backpacking trip was over. Since it was off season, I hadn't made any reservations for a hotel, but we were able to get a room at the El Tovar Lodge, which was very interesting and old and rustic, but a nice place to stay with a great restaurant. If you're going to eat there for dinner or lunch, you do have to make reservations, so keep that in mind. Once we got our room, got a chance to get showered and cleaned up. It did start snowing. The wind picked up. It was pretty cold at the top. There is an extreme temperature difference between the rim and once you're in the canyon. Then we had to make our drive back to Flagstaff, Arizona, back to the airport. The snow got even worse as we went along, and we got to drive through this to a delayed flight getting home. But all in all, it was a wonderful backpacking trip and a chance to get away.